All right. Well, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining. I think this is the fourth CSP Lunch and Learn for Embracing Modern Endpoint Management. Thanks again for joining over your lunch. My goal here is for device compliance lunch and learn, which means we're going to be going through the options for device compliance in Intune and Azure. And I'm going to be doing some labs. Hopefully, I won't kill you with present or PowerPoint slides, but we'll do a lot of on-hand activities. As always, any questions, you can interrupt me at any time, or you could raise your virtual Teams hand and we'll stop and you can ask your question. So again, anytime you have a question, feel free to stop me. Why don't we start with Chris? He has a few housekeeping things before we begin.
Thanks, Rick. Here we have our agenda for our webinar series, our 2021 CSP webinar series, which is all focused on establishing a strong endpoint management strategy, taking you from the very beginning of the planning and putting all the pieces together. So by the end of the series, you hopefully have a strong endpoint strategy in place. But we are here today on our enforced device compliance to strengthen security. And all of our previous recordings are available at the link there provided for improvement.com. Rick, you want to jump to the next one?
Sure.
And then the second item here is just a quick announcement. We do have a recent partnership with Siren. Siren is one of the leaders in threat intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, and we're really excited to be partnered with them. They do have an event coming up that will be hosted by one of their sales engineers, Mike Fleck, great guy there, who knows the ins and outs of Siren inbox security. So we have the information here on screen. There's a URL at the bottom that we'll put in the chat that can be used to register for the event on April 28th. So just kind of bringing that up as they are a new partner of ours, and we're excited to see what additional capabilities we can continue to offer through CSP. With that being said, back to you, Rick.
All right. So let's get started in the exciting world of device compliance. The agenda is we're going to introduce device compliance. We're going to create some policies, both compliance and conditional access. We're going to spend some time going through some labs I built. We're also going to talk about a new feature, a relatively new feature with compliance called Windows Update Compliance, which is an integration with desktop analytics, which is pretty cool. And lastly, we're going to talk about some upcoming 365 roadmap items for Intune. So what is compliance? I wanted to start off with just a general definition of compliance and why it means different things for different companies. Compliance is conforming to a rule, such as a specification, a policy, standard, or law. Compliance describes the goal that organizations aspire to achieve in their efforts to ensure that they are aware of and take steps to comply with relevant laws, policies, and regulations. So for IT compliance, that last part is really important, laws, policies, and regulations. In my experience, the word compliance means vastly different things for IT professionals. For example, companies that handle credit card transactions that need to adhere to PCI compliance, or they have to meet HIPAA standards for medical industry or OSHA standards. So the point I'm getting at is that some IT departments compliance is a nice to have or required by the security team, but for some IT professionals, it's a daily waking nightmare. So compliance prior to Intune was a patchwork of items that really were never meant for compliance. We just kind of adapted them to help with compliance reporting and compliance enforcement. Some of the items, for example, network software such as Nessus, of course, group policy. I'm sure many still use group policy for compliance enforcement. And configuration manager also threw their hat into the compliance ring with baselines, configuration items, whether it was to uninstall an unapproved or a blacklist application, um, or making updates, enforcing updates to products like Chrome or Flash. Curious, are how many of you out there are still using some of these tools for compliance, such as Nessus or configuration baselines?
We use a combination of group policy and baselines or compliance settings in Config Manager.
Yeah, they work pretty well. They are sometimes difficult to, especially in the reporting side of it, get really information required for audits and to validate compliance. So I think that's where Intune comes in and kind of saves the day, because Intune makes it very easy, especially from the reporting and adherence part of compliance. Intune device compliance is a check mechanism. It evaluates if a device meets the specified security requirements per an organization's security policy. And based off that, it's pretty simple label of yes, you're compliant, or no, you're non-compliant. And it's really off that label that you can do some interesting things. It's good to clarify that Intune is not an enforcement of compliance, or Intune device compliance, I should say. It's really just an evaluation. When you start enforcement, or you want to get some teeth into or action into non-compliance, then we're talking conditional access policies, which we'll also get into. So next slide is we're going to talk about the two parts of device compliance in Intune. There is compliance policy settings, and there's device compliance policy. So compliance policy settings, it's a tenant-wide setting, or settings that are built in to a compliance policy that every device in your organization receives that is enrolled in Intune. Compliance settings, you can see them as a baseline for how compliance policies work in your Intune environment, including whether devices that haven't received any device compliance policies that are compliant or non-compliant. Now, device compliance policies, those are platform specific. You could have a Win 10 compliance policy, an iOS compliance policy. These rules define requirements for that specific device type. Example, minimum operating system or encryption on disks. We'll go into more detail, specifically when we look into the labs coming up. I wanted to touch on too, I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with Intune and what Intune covers nowadays. But I just wanted to make sure that you realize that Intune not only covers Win 10 devices, they now support mobile, iOS, Android devices, tablets, Unix, even Mac devices. So we're focusing on Win 10 device compliance for this lab, but keep in mind it could apply to any of these platforms. And if you're interested in some of these pretty cool ways to do compliance with iOS or Android devices, let me know. Reach out to me. I would love to walk you through some of these features. So before I proceed, any questions yet? Anything on mobile device compliance or anything on Win 10?
A quick question, Rick.
Sure.
On the laptop desktop side, what about Linux variants?
Yes, Linux is folded under Unix basically, and there is Linux support. It's a little limited compared to some of the options Win 10 and mobile devices have, but the answer to your question is yes. And if you would love me to walk you through how to, there's a few steps you need to do to import some of these features for Linux, but if you would like to know that, reach out to me after this meeting.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Intune device compliance policy options. So let me jump for the first time into the Intune environment. Can you guys see the MEM Admin Center?
We do not. We see your slide still.
You still see the slide? Okay. Let me cut out of that. How about now?
Looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go into device compliance. So this is the home page of the Microsoft Endpoint Management Admin Center, which used to be called the Intune Admin Center, but they've kind of merged this. It's again MEM, a merging of Intune and Configuration Manager into one cohesive product. So in here, you go to, on the left-hand blade, Devices, and in the middle blade, you'll go to under Compliance Policies. Now, before we go into the actual policies, let me cover a couple of these other areas because they're kind of important. So the first area I want to cover is notifications. Notifications is the template you're going to build that is going to notify your end users if they're non-compliant. So in my example here, I created a template that basically you can include the name of the template. You can include a company header, company name, contact information, and a link to the company portal website. You can then add a body to the, well, I'm sorry, no, that was just the notification area. Let me go back to that. So the in the notification itself, if you go to the compliance settings, the compliance settings say require encryption to a data storage device. I'm sorry, guys, let me back up. I don't want to go into the policy yet. I'm still in the notifications. Sorry about that. So if I go back into the template, then I go into the actual body of the template, what you can write. In my example, I basically have Intune has detected your device as being non-compliant. Please contact the help desk for further assistance. Thank you, your IT department. So any machine that's non-compliant and you just want to send a message, this is what they'll receive in their inbox. Of course, you can customize this to please run a sync on your device first, because many times the sync of your device, if it is compliant, will update the status and you'll never have to reach the IT department. But for this example, that's what I put. So again, under notifications, this is the template you build to let end users know what to do. So retire non-compliant devices. This is really Intune's only way of taking action on non-compliance. You can set a period of time for a device to be non-compliant, let's say 90 days. If they're still non-compliant after 90 days, you can retire the device in Intune. Now you may ask, what does retire mean? Retire does not delete the device. It just puts it in retire status, which will limit the activities that that machine can do via Intune. This is really more for administrators of Microsoft Endpoint Management. They can easily pull up a list of retired devices and take action based off of that list. Locations, you can build compliance policies based off of location. For example, maybe West has a different compliance standard than East. Maybe different countries have different compliance standards. So you can build locations and point those policies to specific locations. And lastly, under the options, you have compliance policy settings, mark devices with no compliance policy assigned as compliance or non-compliant based off of how you want that to read. Enhanced jailbreak detection, you can enable that for mobile devices. And your compliance status validity period. I set it to 1 for our lab, but by default, I believe it's 30 days. And again, based off of what your requirements are, you can set that. So those are kind of your options for compliance policies. Now let's dig into an actual compliance policy. So I built one already, and it's called Improving Device Compliance Demo. What I'm going to do is go through some of these options in compliance setting or compliance policy, and I will show you what I set. So the first part of a compliance policy is the name of the policy. You then select what platform you want this compliance policy to apply to. fact, let me create a new one so I can show you some of these. So for example, you can do Android compliance policy, Apple or iOS compliance policy, or mobile compliance policy, a Mac OS compliance policy. I've heard in not too distant future, they're going to implement some compliance policies for Linux. You can do it now, but you have to kind of do a little out of the box configuration to make that happen. But sooner than later, it's going to be integrated into the compliance template. And you have Win 10 and Win 8. So once you select your platform, you then name it. We'll call it test for now. And now here are all your compliance setting options. You have device health. Does your device require BitLocker, secure boot? Does it require code integrity? You then go under device properties and you can select the minimum OS version, the max OS version, minimum for mobile devices, max for mobile devices, or you can select a range, an array of different OS versions that are compliant. Again, just to reiterate, this doesn't do anything. This is just going to detect whether your device is compliant or not compliant. So if I put in here minimum OS version, Win 10 current branch 2002, any Win 10 device that hasn't been updated to 2002 will be considered non-compliant, but no action will happen unless you program an action to happen. So configuration manager compliance, this is basically whether or not they have, they're onboarded with configuration manager, which we call co-managed in this environment. Do you have a co-managed configman and Intune device? And if you don't, if it's required and you don't, it's going to be considered non-compliant. So the bulk of a lot of compliance settings are through security, password length, password type, password expiration, things like that. Under the encryption section, is encryption required? Is firewall required? Antivirus, anti-spyware, Defender. Do you have Microsoft Defender antiware or anti-malware? Do you have real-time protection enabled? And lastly, under compliance, do you have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint? Do you have a risk score above a certain number? The good news is next month, I'm going to be going over Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and we will spend time on what a risk score is. So hopefully by the end of that session, you'll know all about risk score and how it applies to a Win 10 or compliance policy in general. So that's it for the options of a compliance policy. Do you guys have any questions, or does anyone have any questions about the settings? Okay, so again, I already created a compliance policy and I made it very simple and I put only one option in. And that one option is required encryption of a data storage on device. So at least the data drive is required to be encrypted. So once you set that policy, what you do next is you set it a scope, meaning who you want it to go to, whether it's a group, users, or devices. In my, or assignments, I should say, in my lab, I assign this compliance policy to the Improving Device Compliancy Demo and the Improving Device Compliancy Demo Endpoint -CA or compliant or a conditional access policy. I'll explain why I did that when we go later in the lab to show you how this compliance policy can have some teeth. So back to our slide.
Hey, Rick, one question real quick while you are getting back to the slide deck. When you assign a compliance policy, is it recommended to assign it to a group of users or a group of devices? And what would really be the impacts to doing one or the other?
So the suggestion is to assign it to users. The reason being is devices can be devices are a lot more less stable. You can wipe a device, add a device. So if it's devices, there could be a lot of legacy information in there. And for users, it's a lot easier to build compliant or conditional access policies in Azure as well. So my recommendation would be you can use users or computers, but my recommendation, if you can use users, always use user groups.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. Okay, so we went through creating an Intune device compliance policy. Now we're going to talk about Azure conditional access policies. So you can think of a conditional access policy as the action, the if-then of a compliance policy. If compliance policy is non-compliant, then do this. If a user wants to access a resource, they need to be compliant. If a user wants enable multi-factor authentication, they need to be compliant. For example, a payroll manager wants to access the payroll application and is required to perform a multi-factor authentication. So there's lots of options in an Azure conditional access policy, and we'll go through some of these. But basically, this is the way you enforce compliance. Again, there's two levels. Level one is you can just send an email to the user, or you can send a notification to a mem admin saying this device is non-compliant, and they can do manual action to get that device compliant. Or you can use conditional access policies to automatically enforce some action. So let me go into conditional access policies. Now, up until not too long ago, conditional access policies were only accessed through Azure. But now you can actually access a conditional access policy through a shortcut in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So let me show you that. Can you guys see MEM?
Sure can.
Perfect. Okay, so again, if you go under devices, you see under compliance policies, you now have an option for conditional access. Conditional access is basically a link to the Azure conditional access policy. So I have also a tab open in my Azure portal, and conditional. These are the same things. So if you see here, I built an improving device compliance demo, block access to Outlook. It automatically replicated over to Azure. So in compliant or in conditional access, you have, if you create a new policy, you have quite a lot of options. We're not going to go through every single one, but I want to go through some pretty common ones that people use. So you would name the conditional access policy, and the first thing you would assign it to users or groups. You can assign it to all users in your environment. You can assign it to just specific or select users or groups. One thing I'd like to note here, especially if you're new to conditional access and you're building, let's say, your first conditional access policy, I would always include and exclude either user or group, whether it's the person building the policy, whether it's the group he or she belongs to. It's a good backdoor because you'd be surprised how many times people lock themselves out by building a conditional access policy where they're affected. So again, I would always make it a habit to put and exclude in there for a user or a group. So let's say you'd select all users. You want all users to adhere to this conditional access policy. Look at this. When you say don't lock yourself out, this policy will affect all the users. So it happens a lot. So Microsoft felt they should put a little caption in here. The next is you select the cloud app or the action to be taken. So you can say, I want to include all cloud apps. I want to include select apps. And from there, you can select O365. You can select Microsoft Stream. So you can do many apps, but only limited to cloud apps. You can exclude, or you can do user actions. And by user actions, you can select register security information or register join domain devices. So let's say we select a specific cloud app and we do O365. And what's kind of finicky about conditional access is not only do you have to select it, but at the bottom you have to click select to actually apply that cloud app to the policy. So conditions are where you get into the real options. Okay, what does that cloud app have or have to have? For example, device platform. This cloud app has to have a Windows device to include a Windows device. This cloud app has to be only for trusted locations or only for select locations in my environment. So those are some of the options in conditions. And the last part is the control itself. Do you want to grant, so the most common for control is you grant required device to be marked as compliant. And what that means is in conjunction with a device compliance policy in Intune, this is what you want. You're granting access to this app or action only if the device is marked as compliant in Intune. So let me show you this in action. This device, I created a conditional access policy, a very simple one that said, I created a group called Improving Device Compliance Demo Endpoint -CA for conditional access. I selected all cloud apps. The one condition I included was that it has to be a Windows device. And the one control I selected was, again, grant access only if the device is marked as compliant. So basically, if your device is not marked as compliant, you will not be able to access Outlook. So let me also show you a couple things that I've done in this lab. I have built 3 devices. I've built one device or 2 devices that are not encrypted. So as you can see, they're marked as non-compliant. So you also may want to know in your environment why a device is marked as non-compliant. Well, they make it pretty easy. You just click on the device itself and you go to device compliance in the middle blade, and it will tell you why your device is non-compliant. So the built-in device compliance policy is, I mentioned there's tenant-wide device compliance. That's this built-in one. The one I created is called Improving Device Compliance Demo. And that one, the only requirement in device compliance was your data drive has to be encrypted. Well, in this device, it says requires encryption of data storage on device. So you know why this device is not compliant. Any questions with that before I proceed? Okay, so I have 2 devices, 2 Hyper-V virtual machines that are not encrypted, and I created one that is encrypted. So I also created 2 groups, as I showed you before under conditional access. One that basically just says mark as non-compliant. And remember, I created in my compliance policy as mark as non-compliant, what it's going to do is send an email. So you're going to get an email saying, call your help desk because your device is non-compliant. And the other group I created was called Improving Device Compliance Demo Endpoint -CA, which I connect the conditional access policy to. And in this one, I have my virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 3 in the conditional access policy group. And in my other group, I have virtual machine 2 and 3. And the reason I added 3 to both groups is, remember, 3 is the only compliant machine. It's the only encrypted machine. So I wanted to show you that it has no impact, whether it won't get an email saying it's not compliant, and it won't block you from accessing Outlook. So let me go into my virtual machines and show you this in action. So I have virtual machine 1. This is the one that is not encrypted and is in the conditional access policy. So this one is saying, I'm not encrypted, I'm non-compliant, and I have a conditional access policy which says I can't access Outlook until this compliance issue is resolved. So let me try to go into Outlook on this machine. Enter my username. And look at this. It says, oops, you can't get into this yet. This is the standard template for conditional access blocking you. It says, oops, you can't get into this yet. So as a IT admin or a Azure or MEM admin, if a user says they have this, it more than likely means that a conditional access policy is blocking them somehow. So we see this works. If I encrypt this device, in fact, you know what? Let me do that. Let me do it real quick. I have to go into Reg. I have to go into, no, I have to go into group policy. And because it's a virtual machine, I have to do, that doesn't have TPM, I have to do a couple things real quick. But yeah, while I'm showing you the other two machines, let me encrypt this and let me see if I'm allowed to access Outlook then. Let's see.
So Rick, while you're doing that,
Sure.
there was a question, are there any times where you would want to delay compliance enforcement?
That is a great question, and the answer is yes. Under your compliance options, remember I had that 1 day. You can set it to 30 days. You can set it to 60 days. So basically, you can give the end user or the IT professional time to review the issue and make that device compliant before a conditional access policy is applied. In fact, why that's a great question is if there is a conditional access policy, you probably usually do want to give them time to resolve the issue unless it's a serious security risk. So let me begin encrypting this. Okay, off that goes encrypting. So let's go to device 2. Device 2, if you recall, has the standard device compliance policy and no conditional access policy applied to it. So in our settings, we said we're just going to send them an email saying, you better call the help desk because your device is non-compliant. So if we log in here with my second user account, okay, this is just a Microsoft. Here it is. So it says your device is non-compliant. So Intune has detected your device as being non-compliant. Please contact your help desk for further assistance. And it also has a link to, this is all Microsoft standard information, but again, you can customize this to show your company logo, a link to maybe the sync portal, things like that, let's say you don't have a service desk or you want them to try to resolve it on their own before they do that. Those are your options. So account 2 got an email. The last one is a machine that is encrypted. So if I go into PowerShell just to confirm it's encrypted. BDE status. Hold on a second. Let's just go to BitLocker. As you can see, BitLocker on. So BitLocker is on and it is protecting the machine. That's why machine 3 was compliant, and machine 3 should have no problem accessing Outlook. And furthermore, machine 3 should not be getting a message from the compliance policy saying they're not compliant. So they should be A-OK. Let's go into their email and validate. Sure enough, all they have is about Microsoft Audio Connection or Audio Conference. They have no email regarding them being non-compliant, and as you can see, they can access Outlook. So let me go back to machine 1. Machine 1 is now encrypted. It's wonderful how quickly machines get encrypted nowadays. Remember back in the day when it took hours for a machine to get encrypted and even longer to be decrypted? So let me go back to device 1 and I'm going to sync it. Device 1 was this one, I believe. And let me do a sync. And a sync in Microsoft Endpoint Manager is basically just to pull the latest settings and configurations from the machine. So hopefully it'll show that now it's encrypted, and hopefully sooner than later it should show as compliant. So this machine should flip over to compliant sooner than later, and then we'll see if we can access Outlook. But while we're waiting for that, let's go back to the presentation. Any questions while I'm pulling that up? Okay. Wrong one. I'm sorry about that.
Quick time check, Rick. There's 12:45 now, so about 15 minutes left.
Oh, okay. I talk too much. Let me start over. Can you guys see the presentation now?
Yeah, we're back at the title screen.
Perfect. Okay. Let me jump over to the screen we were at. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on, and we're running out of time, so I'll just go through it quickly, is there's a new feature in, relatively new feature in Microsoft Endpoint Manager called Windows Update Ring device compliance. And it's a little more, it has a little more meat than the current device compliance reporting in MEM and Azure. It uses Windows for Business. It uses desktop analytics. So what you need to do before you can actually configure it is you need to add a component in Azure. Oops, sorry, I went one too many. And that component, I have a link in the presentation, but I could also, if any of you would be interested in adding this, it's a free component. You basically go to the Azure Marketplace, you install it. And again, if you already have desktop or Azure Analytics running, there's nothing you need to do but a couple settings. If you don't have desktop analytics running, that's pretty easy to get in place. And what happens is it just provides a much more robust reporting on Windows update compliance, and also provides the ability to take action on devices that are non-compliant. It's a really slick feature. And again, if you want more information on it and you want to see it in action, reach out to me. We can get desktop analytics in place, get this Azure Marketplace component installed, and away you go. So let me hand it back over to Chris to wrap up a couple housekeeping things.
All right, thanks, Rick. Great job.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, our upcoming schedule, our next session will be on May 11th at 12 p.m. Eastern, and Rick will be presenting again on Defender for Endpoint. So kind of diving into the details on what that solution has to offer, and especially around how do you monitor and respond to threats and attacks that Defender for Endpoint can detect. So looking forward to that session. We will be posting the recording of today's session up to our website, and the link is there near the top there at improving.com. So all of our recordings are available there, as well as from our previous webinar series from last year. So take a look there for any of the past sessions to kind of get caught up. Otherwise, appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us today, and leave it open for if there's any other questions. Great job, Rick.
Thank you. And before we say goodbye too, let's go back to our machine we encrypted and see if the magic happened.
So Rick, while you're pulling that up, quick question.
Sure.
Where do you see Microsoft going with config man and co-management? Is it all going to eventually be in Endpoint Manager?
That is the million-dollar question. And that's what me and my colleagues have been debating about for the past 6 months. Some feel that Configuration Manager will never go away. There's too much functionality that the Intune side of it can't handle. Personally, I'm not too sure on that. I see Intune grabbing more and more of the functional pie. Will it take a while, in my opinion? Yes. But could I envision a future where on-prem Configuration Manager goes away? I could. So as you see here, the device is now compliant. So encrypting it did the trick. Now the real test is to see if we can get into Outlook on virtual machine 1. So let's now go into Outlook. Let's see if we can log in. And look at that. This time we can. Now you do have some notifications of non-compliance because of the original. As you can see, these dates were pretty old. But you can see that the configuration or the compliance policy worked and the conditional access policy worked, because now I can get back into Outlook. So that was it. Again, if you really want some information on mobile device compliance and how you can do some really cool things with that, or if you want more information on that new feature on Windows update compliance as an integration with Azure let me know. I'd love to show you that. And I'll leave the forum open now for any questions or comments. I'd love to get other people's opinions on the Configuration Manager Intune battle and who's going to lead that. What do you think, Griffin?
Were you still talking about Microsoft Endpoint Manager in the future of kind of what on-prem?
Right.
I see Microsoft adding more functionality to Intune and still making it more of a hybrid solution, particularly on the desktop side, as opposed to managing servers. The primary one that I'm seeing right now is I think OS deployment is going to go away from the way that we've known it. It'll still exist, but the lean will be for the device to be deployed initially from Autopilot, and then have that integrate with the on-premise pieces of Microsoft Endpoint Manager.
I know that one of the limitations of provisioning is huge app stacks, right? Your accounting department has gigs and gigs of application that need to be installed. I think with pre-provisioning, which used to be called white glove, I think a lot of that can be solved, especially if you have a really good partnership with whoever your depot or your device provisioner is. A lot of that can be done on their bench as well.
Yep.
We still recording, Mr. Lee?
Yes, I am actually going to go ahead and stop that now. Great job, Rick. And again,
Thank you.
thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.